Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is roll out our cookie dough and bake our cookies. You can find my rolled sugar cookie recipe on my blog, and I like this recipe for the fact that it doesn't rise too much, so it doesn't, it holds its shape really well in baking. You don't lose your cookie cutter shape too much. I'm actually going to cut this in half. It's a little more than I want to roll out at one time. I also like to use wooden dowels on either side, so I make sure I roll the cookie dough at exactly the same thickness. And I loosen my cookie dough from the tabletop so that when I cut it out, it's easy to pick them up without misshaping the cookie. It's a little thicker than I want it, so I'm going to get thinner dowels. Okay, for this Mother's Day cookie set, I'm going to be using my M and a oval for the O, and then another oval for the inside of the O. And then some hearts, different size hearts and flowers, and a round cookie cutter and a fluted round. Get a nice clean cut on your cookie and push it out right onto your cookie sheet. Now for the O, I'm going to do two of the larger circle or ovals a little bit thinner, and then one for the center that is going to be a little bit thicker, because I'm going to do the O as my Kaleidoscope cookie, which you can find a tutorial for also on my blog. So one that's thicker. And then go ahead and cut out the center. Now I'm going to do two more of those, but just a little bit thinner. We need another M. We're going to try and puzzle as many of these in here as we can. So let's do the M here. Now we're going to roll this just a little bit thinner. I wanted it thicker for the O and the M's so that they wouldn't have a tendency to break. They're thin pieces, but the rest of the cookies are a little bit less of a worry on their design that they would break easily. So we're going to roll this out a little bit thinner. We'll get more cookies out of it that way as well. One large plaque that we're going to write Happy Mother's Day on. And now I want two more of our ovals. And you don't have to do the O as a kaleidoscope cookie. You can just do just an O by itself if you want. And you can re-roll your scraps, so just make sure there's not a bunch of flour on them. Set them aside and we'll re-roll those. And I actually like to stack all of the O's together so that I get the hole cut in exactly the same place for all of them. So that when I'm doing the kaleidoscope cookie that they line up nicely. Okay, so there is our set of cookies. Now you're going to put these in the freezer for 10 minutes and make sure they're nice and hard before you bake them at 400 for between 8 and 12 minutes depending on your oven. I like to check them at 8 minutes and then they usually need to go another minute or so. You don't want them to start browning very darkly, just a very light golden brown and they'll be done. Okay, now that you have a batch of your royal icing prepared, we're going to color it and make it the proper consistency for decorating our cookies. So when you first make the royal icing, it is a stiff consistency. We want to thin this out so that we can flood the cookies with a consistency that will spread out and make a nice smooth layer on the cookie. We're going to do this with water, and I like to put my flavoring in the water, so whatever extract you'd like your frosting to be flavored, add a few drops to your water, and then you're going to start adding water to your royal icing a little bit at a time until you achieve the consistency that you want for your cookies. There are several different consistencies for flooding cookies, for outlining cookies. What we want is called a 10-second icing, and I'm going to show you how to achieve that. So just keep adding a little bit of water at a time and mixing. and then we will test our consistency. If you're coloring your icing, you can add your coloring in now, so you can be mixing it in while you are achieving the consistency that you want. Once you get to the point where your icing is running off your spatula and ribbons, you want to start testing it for the proper consistency. So just jiggle your bowl and get the icing flat in the bowl, and then clean off your spatula. Then you're going to draw your spatula through the icing and watch the line. When you draw your spatula through, start counting. And when you get to a point where it comes back together in 10 seconds, that's your 10-second icing. So draw a line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Our line did not completely come together, so we're going to add a little bit more water and keep mixing and then test again. Okay, let's test again. If there's any bubbles, go ahead and pop them so you've got a nice clean smooth surface to test in. Draw your line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, our icing came together in 10 seconds, so it's ready to go. Now we're going to put it into our piping bags. I usually use disposable piping bags, and I like to use the Wilton No. 2 tips for most of my cookie designs. If you're going to be doing big areas of flooding, you can use a No. 3 round tip, but for the most part when I do more intricate cookies, I like to use a No. 2 tip. I also like to put my bag into a cup to be able to fill it easier. It just makes it so you have one more hand to use for scraping the bowl, and it's less awkward filling the piping bag this way. So go ahead and get all of your colors prepared and use a No. 2 Wilton No. 2 round tip and get them all prepared in your icing bags. I also like to close my icing bags with either a rubber band or an icing tie. It just makes the bags more secure. You're not going to be worried about them popping open and leaking when you're decorating. So get all your icings prepared and we'll get started. Okay, now that our cookies are baked and cooled and we have our icing colors prepared and ready to go, I've also made some cake lace, which I love to use to embellish my decorated cookies. I like to use Claire Bowman's cake lace. I find it's the easiest to use, but whatever you have on hand will work. I've made a few little fondant flowers for some of the decorations, and I have my fancy sprinkle mix that I had custom made by Sprinkle Pop. I sent them a color palette I found online and they matched it perfectly, so I've got some gorgeous sprinkles ready to go. So go ahead and set those things aside. We're going to start by flooding a few of the cookies with a base color background, and those will need to dry completely before we do further decorating on them. So we're going to do those first and set those aside and let them dry for 24 hours. So we're starting with the large heart, and I'm going to be doing some brush embroidery on this one. So I'm going to have a light teal background, and I like to leave my icing about 1/8 of an inch to even 1/4 of an inch away from the edge, because I like to do some decorative details around the edges, some little lace detailing or dots, different borders on different cookies. But I do like to have a little edge where I can do some more decorating after they've dried. And I'm just going to use my scribe to smooth things out and spread the icing to be even on all of the edges where I want it to be. In the process, popping any bubbles that I see. Just making my icing as even as possible on the two sides of the heart so they match. And then I tap my cookie a little bit, and that helps bring any bubbles to the surface that I can then pop with my scribe. Okay, we're going to set that aside and let that dry for 24 hours. We're going to do the same with our plaque. This one here is going to be our sprinkle cookie. I'm going to do the light teal background. Don't go too close to the edge because your sprinkles will just fall off, so give yourself about a little more than 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the cookie. Spread out all nice and even. Have your bowl of sprinkles ready. You can kind of play with the sprinkles where you might want different colors and different pieces, and then dip straight down. There we go. There's our sprinkle cookie. Now we're going to do an M. This one's going to have a little strip of lace, and then we're going to add some more scroll detailing after it dries. Now we're going to take some more of our lace, and I'm going to cut a little strip of this part of it. Let that dry, and we'll cut off the excess, and then we're going to do some scroll flower piping here. This one is going to be our Kaleidoscope cookie. We're going to go ahead and decorate it first, and then we will do the Kaleidoscope technique. Okay, so now that our cookies have dried overnight, we're going to finish the decorating. So to start, I'm just going to trim off the excess lace, and you just need a pair of fine scissors and trim right up next to the icing so there's no extra lace hanging over the icing. If there's anything that's kind of sticking up from the edge, we can go ahead and put a little bit of gum glue on that to adhere it to the icing. We'll do that a little later. The next thing I'm going to do is show you how to make some little icing packets. I like to use these when I'm doing little fine detail decorating as opposed to the large piping bags with piping tips. I can get a finer point and adjust the size of my lines by just trimming a small or a larger amount off the tips of these. And these are made with cellophane. Basically gift wrap cellophane, so I just buy that in big rolls. So I'm going to show you quickly how to do that. You can also make these little piping bags with parchment paper. get the strip off of your cellophane roll. And then from one corner, fold up until you have the triangle, so you meet this edge with this edge, and kind of give it a little crease. And then you can see right this edge right here is where you're going to cut it, and you'll have a perfect square. So now you have a square, and you're going to cut it on the diagonal, right where you did your little folded crease. If you've ever made parchment cones, this is basically the same thing. So now I'm going to use a little bit of cellophane tape. Laying with the point towards you, you're going to grab this corner and tuck it in, so you're making a cone shape. You're rolling it so that you have a cone, and then you're going to meet this corner with your point and hold it there. And grab a small piece of cellophane tape, and with this cone rolled as tight as you can, you can adjust, you can push this cone in until you have a really sharp point, and lay that piece of cellophane tape down inside to tape that down. So now you have that secured. Grab another piece of cellophane tape and wrap the other point all the way around until its point meets your top point here. And you can kind of adjust it with your fingers by sliding your fingers back and forth until you get a really nice sharp point. You're closing it all the way, so it's basically a very closed pointed cone. And go ahead and put another piece of tape to hold that flap down, and now you're ready to fill your cone. And I usually set this in a small container to hold it upright for me while I fill it. So then get some of your stiff royal icing in a small dish. We're going to make this quite thick. We want to use this as, we're going to do some little lace piping and some dots around the outer edges, and we're also going to be doing some lettering. So you don't want an icing that's going to spread out. You want it quite thick. But a stiff royal icing, as you get when you very first mix it, is a little too stiff. It'll just break. It won't flow out of your tip. So we're just going to add a few drops of water at a time, literally just like 2 drops at a time, until we get just the right consistency. And I will show you what we're looking for. See, this is already smoothing it out and making it more like kind of peanut butter. Now, when you pull your knife up off of your icing, you get a point. And if it stays in that point, it's still too thick. You want it to slightly droop over. So add another drop or 2. Just a drop at a time, because it's really easy to make this too soft, too liquidy. At this point, you can add your color if you're coloring this. Now when I pull my knife up, it's still keeping a sharp point, so I'm going to add another drop of water. I'm just going to keep doing this process until I find the right consistency. Now see, it drooped over that time. See how I did that when I pulled it up? Instead of holding a stiff peak, it curves over. So I'm gonna call that good, and I'm gonna add this to my little piping bag that I just made. Now these little piping bags you do not want to fill too overly full, because we need to have some room to fold down. And it does not take a lot of this to do our little embellishments, so you don't need a ton. So once you have your icing in your bag, you have your long pointed side is going to lay down on your bench, and then there's a straight edge here, so you push that down flat. And then you're going to take one long piece of tape and seal that spot. Tape that down and roll your excess behind. And then push your icing down to the tip so it's nice and tight. And then we're going to fold one side in and then the other side in. So that makes a nice triangle point here. And then we're going to start folding that down. So fold it down twice until you get a really nice tight piping bag. Take another long piece of tape and tape that flap down. And that's it. Now you have your really fine-tipped, very maneuverable piping bag ready for writing and details. Now we will be cutting our tip to whatever size we want. Excuse me. We'll be cutting our tip to whatever size we want our line to be. Okay, we're going to start with some scroll piping on the dark purple cookie. So it's pretty random. You just want to make your little scrolls and spirals and pleasing patterns. Pretty good to me. So I'm going to leave this one like this. I'm not going to do a border on it because I feel like there's so much detail already. Alright, that one's done. We're going to let that dry and we'll paint that with a gold luster after it's dry. Okay, so on this one we're going to do a little bit of gold scrolling as well. A little bit more basic. And then we're going to do some white dots around the edge, and before we do that I'm going to go ahead and glue down any little bits of lace that are still sticking up from the edge of the cookie here. So just a very damp paintbrush, and then press the lace down. And we're going to do a pretty little dot border. And when that dries, we'll paint some gold luster dust on that one. This one's going to get some purple scrolling. good on that one. This one gets some more gold. We're going to do some sprinkles on this one. So just going to do a line of our original flood icing across the center of this one. Not too much. And then we're going to take out any of the big sprinkles. So we just have some of the little ones that we're going to put on this one. Now we're going to do a little border on this one as well. Do a little bit of piping on this one as well. And now we're going to do some brush embroidery on our large teal cookie. So you need a little dish of water and a paper towel. And a couple of flat brushes, a medium size and a small. They're flat and short bristled. Then you want a packet of your original stiff royal icing. And then I like to use a little flower cutter as a template for piping the flowers onto the cookies. And I just trace it on with a little scribe or something with a sharp point. You can freehand these as well. I usually do one full one and then a couple of partials around the edges, just in random places. So you're going to pipe a border around where you just traced, and you're going to do a pretty thick zigzag line. And just follow your trace line, or pretty close to it. You can vary it a little bit so each flower isn't exactly the same, but that tracing gives you a good guideline. Then you're going to take your brush and get it damp and then blot it off on a paper towel so it's not dripping wet, it's just damp. And you're going to start pulling in these little jagged zigzag lines. Pull them in towards the center of the petal. And you don't grab the whole line, you're kind of grabbing halfway into that line of icing and leaving the tip and then pulling in the rest of it towards the center of the petal. And if you get too much icing on your brush, go ahead and rinse it off and dry your brush off again. Now you're going to do 3 petals in the center, and this is more of a free hand. You just do a smaller little jagged section and space out 3 of them in the center. And then I use my thinner brush and do the same thing, just on a smaller scale. And then you can put a little dot or a little swirl right in the center. Repeat that on the rest of your flowers. Now we're going to do a leaf, and this is more of a freehand thing, so you're just going to do a zigzag line for a leaf shape as you did on the flowers. Now I'm going to do some gold dots. These will get painted gold later. And then a bead border on this one as well. Sticking with the white on this one. Okay, let that dry and we'll paint our dots. And I'm going to pour the isomalt for our Kaleidoscope cookies. And for more details on how to make these Kaleidoscope cookies, refer to the post that I have on my blog. I have a full tutorial on how to do these. So I'm pouring my prepared isomalt right into the center. Just making sure that the isomalt goes all the way to the edges. Now we're going to let those set, and then we'll come back and finish the Kaleidoscope cookies. Okay, once these are cool, we're going to take them off the pan. They should release fairly easily with a little spatula. Now we're going to immediately treat these with a clear edible spray glaze so that the isomalt doesn't get damaged by moisture in the air. So you're just going to put this on either some parchment paper or an old box This stuff really gets all over the place, so make sure you put it on something that you can throw away. We're going to do both sides. To let that side dry, and then flip it over and do the other side. Okay, now we're going to put together our kaleidoscope cookie. So we have the back side and we have the middle, and then we have the front. So they're going to get stacked like this. So the first thing we're going to do is glue the middle down to the back side. We're going to just use a little bit of our white flood icing. Now we're going to fill with our sprinkles, and this lovely sprinkle pop mix that I had custom made. Some of the sprinkles are too large for our hole, so they wouldn't quite fit in there, so I'm going to take the biggest ones out. And then I'm just going to put a little handful of them in there. I'm probably going to take out these big rods too. I don't think they're going to be quite as maneuverable in there. Okay. Now we're going to glue on our top. Make sure everything is lined up nicely. Now we're going to set that aside to dry for a little while, and then we're going to do a little bit of more decorative piping on here. See how pretty that is? Now that we've let the kaleidoscope cookies dry a little bit, we're going to do some final piping. Just some little gold detailing. Let that dry and we'll paint it gold. Okay, so there are several different ways that you can do lettering on your cookies. I've made a template here that says Happy Mother's Day, and I have cut it out with my cookie cutter so I know exactly where to place it on the cookie, so I have the alignment right and lay that down on the cookie. And then with a scribe tool or something sharp like a pin, you can poke small holes all along your lettering and give yourself a line to follow when you are piping your letters. For this one, I made a stencil on my Cameo cutter, and I cut it out of a template stock, and I will just put that on top of the cookie and spread the royal icing on top of it, and you get some really nice clean lettering with that method. checking here to make sure my letters are coming through nicely so I can follow the dots when I'm piping. Now I could just follow the dotted line when I'm piping. Now I'm going to glue my flowers down with a little bit of royal icing on the backs. Okay, so now we're going to paint our embellishments gold. So you're going to want an edible gold highlighter or luster dust. Make sure it's edible. There are several different edible brands you can get, and one of them is Wilton Gold Luster Dust. You can get it at Michael's. So go ahead and mix your luster dust with a little bit of Everclear, and with a very fine tipped brush, you're gonna make a paint. It's a fairly liquidy paint. You don't want it too thick. You can see it's pretty runny. And go ahead and paint everything that you did the gold piping. It's a little bit tedious, but just take your time. It's a beautiful effect, so it's worth the time. I'm using Rolcom Super Gold highlighter, and technically it's edible in other countries. In the USA it's not FDA approved for consumption yet, but it is in other countries. This is the reason why you want to pipe anything that is going to be painted in gold. You want to have a base color. Your icing needs to be yellow or gold, because if you miss a few spots down towards the edges, it's not going to show, because it's very hard to get all painted all the way up against the edge of the cookie. So if you have a little bit that you didn't get the gold highlighter on, it's not going to show near as much as if the icing was white or another color. You'll want to keep stirring your paint and sometimes adding a little more Everclear because the Everclear evaporates really quickly. And if your paint's too thick, it won't flow down the edges of your piping. It will be harder to paint. Also, the highlighter settles a little bit in the bottom, so you want to keep stirring your paint occasionally.